how the people are doing. So, man, before we get started, can I just say, I really do hate dissertations or thesis, whatever the hell you want to call it. It is just the worst on the planet. Like, especially at the start, at the start, it eats time alive. All you are going to do, if you've done it well, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. All you're doing is research. There is nothing else that can be as bad as researching day in, day out, because it is just the worst. Yeah, as you can tell, I really very strongly dislike that thing. It's not my kind of thing. No. I'd much rather do anything else. Drink battery acid if I have to, but I don't like dissertations. This is the best way to put it. Anyways, as I was trying to say, we are finally doing the video comparison between the Xiaomi 15 Ultra and the controversially beloved Vivo X200 Ultra. Now, thing is, I had to do this 3 weeks ago because, well, that was the original timeline, and then this happened. Regardless, here's the situation with this one. What makes this particular comparison so very interesting? You see, the X200 Ultra, it has taken some very interesting steps in a way making things more professional, because in the rear cameras, if you might remember from way back in the distant past when I made the photo comparisons, like, I don't know, again 3 weeks ago, I guess, which is when this was supposed to come out. Well, there's let's say a significant difference in focal lengths with the main cameras. I'm talking 23mm on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra versus 35mm on the X200 Ultra. And that, well, in photos, there are obvious differences. No doubt about that. And more than anything else, in videos, there's a huge concern. Think about it. When you zoom in, you lose stabilization. So what happens with the main camera that has a natural optical zoom present on the Vivo? Has Vivo even accounted for that? Is it going to fare well enough? Well, let's find out. Alright then, selfie videos. Man, feels good to be doing this again. So, here's the deal. Yes, both of these phones are using 4K 30 on both. That's nice to have on paper, sure. But the fact is, the quality difference is massive. Like, it's very significant between the two. At this point, I think it's been almost 2 or 3 years that I've seen Vivo literally produce some of the best, highest quality selfie videos for some reason. Like, somehow their processing and the sheer quality of the videos, maybe the hardware as well, it just works out so well that their video, especially in terms of how well they can handle noise and grain and overall detail preservation, contrast even, there's literally nothing else out there. And I'm talking about basically every single phone. This is not just that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is bad. This is the kind of video you get even from Samsungs, even from iPhones. Speaking from personal experience, and it's very impressive that the X200 Ultra is still, keeping that lead. Yes, there is some amount of grain and artifacting in there, but it's very minor, especially as opposed to what the Xiaomi is doing. Not to mention that the colors are slightly more, I guess the best word would be well presented, because sometimes the contrast feels a little too low, saturation feels a little off, and you see all of these factors combined, they do make the video quality not quite as nice as you might want it to be. Now then, of course, for audio quality, it's a bit of a different situation. You see, the X200 Ultra gives you sort of an unfiltered microphone audio, as opposed to the Xiaomi, which kind of does a lot noise reduction. Now, it could be good depending on what kind of situation you're shooting in. If there's genuinely a lot of noise and you just want to hear your voice clearly, then the Xiaomi might be doing a better job. But if you want generally uncompressed, unadulterated audio, then the X200 Ultra is the way to go. It really does depend on your personal preference, but overall, the audio can go either way, but video quality wise, the X200 Ultra takes it. And then, of course, question of the century: how well does the 35mm main camera 4K 30 and every other mode with the main camera fare against the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, which arguably has some of the most interesting video and overall fairly nice video, as opposed to most of the flagships that we have around. So, looking at it right now, I would say that yes, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, honestly, it has such a nice look when it comes to the colors and the contrast, especially the contrast. High contrast that we get, the very natural color tones, very natural white balance. It just works really well for me. Personally speaking, I really like it. But on the X200 Ultra, everything looks really nice too. Like, there's no two ways about it. Yes, the contrast is slightly low, which in a way, I guess, it is a professional look, so not having a whole bunch of contrast can be beneficial. And secondly, dynamic range looks really nice. And thirdly, the most important thing, stabilization. As you might know, when you crop in, whether optically digital doesn't matter. When you crop in, you lose stabilization. That's just the natural order of things. And it would appear that for the most part, the stabilization is like 90% there. It's not perfect. I would not say that it is perfect, not by a long shot, but it is like 90% there, and you, in most cases, will not notice it. And that is definitely a very, very good thing. Now, with the ultra-wide camera, I would say things are a bit more interesting. So, turns out that in significantly backlit conditions like these, like this is a natural condition when you might just start to shoot a video and you might just have the sun in the background. It's not exactly artificial, it's not exactly going out of the way to get a harsh lighting condition. This is very normal. And considering that, I would say that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra does seem to have a significant problem with a lot of noise and grain and noise reduction artifacts as well, especially in the shadows. And this, in a way, I think it just happens because Xiaomi is trying to lift up the shadows to get more dynamic range, but then that introduces a whole bunch of noise, and then it's trying to reduce the noise, which just muddles everything up. That is not an issue, weirdly enough, on the Vivo. The Vivo's processing, or the way it handles things in general, maybe it's the sensor. The sensor is very high quality, after all, one of the best out there. Maybe it's a combination of those factors, which just leads to some of the best and very consistent ultra-wide video that we can have. Now, of course, when it comes to versatility, I would say that most of the time I don't really care too much about it, because the fact is, and I think this might be the case with others as well, the fact is, I just use the main camera 90% of the time for videos, because that's how you get the best possible quality. And then when it comes to the ultra wide, that's usually for certain situations where I just need that ultra wide field of view. It's a lot more relevant in terms of the Vivo X200 Ultra, because that needs an ultra wide field of view because it has a 35mm main camera. And yes, the telephoto camera that it has is some of the best out there. It's easily the best telephoto camera that I've used. And yeah, I know, the Oppo has a really good telephoto camera as well, but the fact is, they don't bloody launch that phone anywhere. It's impossible to buy. I can't really test it if I can't access it, so there is that. Now, outside of that, with the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, this one has two separate telephoto cameras. But the fact is, neither of those is particularly good. Like, yeah, the 4.3x telephoto, which is like the flagship, the good telephoto on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, it's fine, but it's not the best. Not even anywhere remotely close to the sheer level of quality we can have from the singular telephoto camera that we have on the Vivo. And if you are wondering why I'm saying that, well, keep watching. There's a details test coming soon enough, and you'll know exactly what the hell I'm talking about. But before that, there are a couple other things that we need to bear in mind. First and foremost is HDR, or Dolby Vision, on both phones. I would say in general, they work fine. It works a little bit better in terms of contrast balance and exposure balance on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. So I would recommend that if you have to use it, the Xiaomi might just be the way to go if you really want Dolby Vision. But honestly, I've not really found a singular situation when I personally even use Dolby Vision. It's just not worth using, especially because you have log video on both phones. If you really want to go the professional route, go with log. Now, of course, speaking of log video, this is a very interesting situation. So this is just mildly backlit, because as you can probably tell, there's a good amount of light coming in through the windows, through the balcony, and because of that, it is posing a very significant challenge only to one of the devices. Even without any color grading or anything like that, you can very easily tell that there's a huge problem on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. That problem translates over significantly when it comes to color grading. Like, this is a very classic look that I went for, very clean highlights, like pure, almost pure white highlights on both, and just have a little bit of blue tones in the shadows and just make that green pop. Basically, I'm out here playing around with the hues and the saturation, and everything sticks so well. There's no weird artifacting, there's no cracking. I'm pushing it quite a lot on both phones, and they're handling it like champions. It's very good, the log video quality, but the dynamic range specifically on the poor old Xiaomi it's bad. It's really bad. Alright, so far it has been pretty obvious that despite a lot of initial concerns at least, the X200 Ultra, it's been doing really well. Vivo has fine-tuned quite a lot of things to the point that we are just not having all that many issues. But of course, there's a lot left. Starting off, of course, with 4K 60, which initially it might look nice. Initially, it might look fine, as it did to me. But turns out, very similar to kind of the problem we saw with 4K 30 ultra wide on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra specifically, we now seem to have a very similar issue on both phones. It has that same like noise, and then there's noise reduction, and then basically you have this muddled up shadows that just don't look very nice. It's happening on both phones now. So somehow maybe 4K 60 is just not gonna work out all that well, especially when you're trying to shoot in backlit situations like these. If you're taking normal video like we saw initially, it looked nice, it looked very good. As stabilization also, plenty good on both, to the point that I would say you're not gonna have any real issues with either of these. Now with the ultra-wide camera, things are a little bit more interesting because yes, first and foremost, obviously we do get better dynamic range on the Vivo, that's expected. But you'll also notice that as soon as we start walking, the Vivo is the one that's giving us really nice, really smooth stabilization, no problems whatsoever. But the Xiaomi, now that's the one which has quite an issue. Essentially, there are these micro stutters and jitters that are making it into the way with essentially every single step that I'm taking. So it just comes out with a video that, initially, again, it looks fine, but after the fact, it's not very nice. It's at least not the kind of video that I would want. Now then, let us take a look at 8K video. I gotta say, has the Xiaomi 15 Ultra always sucked balls when it comes to stabilization with 8K? Because I didn't expect that, not in the slightest. Now there's a whole another situation happening with the Vivo, but we'll get to that. But stabilization it's turned off with 8K on the Xiaomi. Has that always been the case? I feel like it wasn't the case back when I tested it, but anyways, let's also talk about the elephant in the room, which is the Vivo. So I didn't realize this until much later. The fact that Vivo actually uses the ultra-wide camera, not the main camera, but the ultra-wide specifically for 8K. It doesn't give you any options, which just makes me think, why not just give us main and ultra-wide 8K? Like you have the exact same sensor and the ultra-wide camera is capable of 8K. How is it that we cannot just use 8K with the main camera as well? Mind-blowing, isn't it? Anyways, we also get ultra-wide 8K, which is exactly what you're looking at on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. And it can do 8K with everything. It can do 8K with the 3x, it can do 8K with the 5x or the 4.3x. My apologies. And it's fine. It looks good initially, but as you'll see soon enough with the details test, things are not quite as they would seem. We'll get to that. But before that, of course, one last thing. I promise it's the last one. So, both phones have super stable modes and they're all at 2.8K, which is Quad HD Plus, and that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I gotta say though, I think it's plenty obvious that stabilization, I had honestly expected the Vivo to be the one suffering from stabilization. This is ultra-wide, super stable. This is the best possible stabilization that you could possibly hope for from both phones. And only one of them is handling the situation well enough. The Xiaomi is not, as you can probably tell. It's a mess really. Like, stabilization seems to be a huge issue on the Xiaomi as opposed to what I had expected by a long shot. Hell, even with the main camera, yes, with the main camera, the Vivo as well suffers quite a bit, because after all, when you're trying to take super stable video with a camera that has a built-in crop, a 35mm crop, as opposed to the regular 23mm on the Xiaomi, it's gonna have a little bit of problem. It's definitely not as good as its very own ultra-wide super stable, but somehow it's still better than what the Xiaomi is producing, which again, just absolutely mind-blowing. It makes no sense whatsoever. Now, speaking of not making sense whatsoever, let's finally take a look at details, because this is honestly always my favorite part of any video comparison I make. It really goes to show just how well the processing can handle bringing out good details. Like, yes, stabilization and everything else, you can judge that through regular videos that we've been seeing so far, but details, there's only one way to do it, which is to crop in. And honestly speaking, I think it looks really good on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Honestly, I didn't expect it to be as nice. There does appear to be quite a lot of grain happening on the X200 Ultra. The detail level is the same, but the grain is very significant. The grain, the artifacting, all that jazz, not particularly nice to see. However, when it comes to 8K, obviously 8K is only possible with the ultra-wide camera on the X200 Ultra, so nothing as such here. But the Xiaomi can of course do 8K with the main camera. Not exactly usable 8K, it just looks horrible with the stabilization, but details, you know? And before we zoom in, let me just ask you one question. Do you think that the Xiaomi focused in this case? Well, if your answer was yes, which I'm guessing it was, you would be wrong, because I was also gravely mistaken about the focusing situation. I've looked through the entire clip and I have no idea where the Xiaomi even decided to focus on. I used the same type to focus as the previous clip, so I don't know. I have no idea. There's no way to even tell what the hell happened here. Very unfortunate. Now then, of course, with the ultra-wide camera now, as you might have guessed, this is the part where things are going to be a lot more interesting because, after all, for some very odd reason, 8K on the X200 Ultra, it is completely limited to the ultra-wide camera. That's, I think, a world's first. They should get a world record for this or something. But regardless, one thing that I do want to point out, the skin tones. Just take a look at those beautiful, perfect skin tones on the Vivo. I would know. I spent an unnecessarily large amount of time trying to dial in the skin tones to look as absolutely natural as possible. And the Vivo is getting about as close to reality as, you know, possible by any smartphone thus far. Xiaomi not even close. But of course we are here for the details, so let's crop all the way in, and it would appear that we have a very similar problem on the X200 Ultra when it comes to detail preservation. It does appear to have a lot of artifacting and grain action happening with the main camera and with the ultra-wide. I'm guessing it might be a sensor related problem because both sensors are the same. So maybe that's the issue here. I'm not really sure, but there is a problem, to say the very least. However, what about 8K with both? Now, once again, I do want to point out those skin tones. I think with 8K, somehow the contrast balance is even better, and now the skin tones and the overall contrast, at least on the face, it just looks even more natural as opposed to the 4K even on the X200 Ultra, which is quite surprising. But then of course, cropping all the way in, and would you look at that? We have a huge amount of problems on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. There's artifacting, there's smearing, there's grain, and there's basically no detail. Complete opposite on the Vivo X200 Ultra. So 4K using the ultra-wide camera on the Vivo, it doesn't look all that nice, but 8K is just tremendous. Which again makes me think, why the hell do we not get proper 8K with the main camera as well? Anywho, let's finally move on to the zoom cameras. Now, the only reason I'm including zoom with the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is because we have actual 8K capabilities with the zoom cameras. The Vivo has nothing of the sort, as you might already know, but the 3.7x telephoto that we do have, easily some of the absolute best on the planet right now, at least among the phones that I've used. And yes, I know the Oppo, it exists somewhere, nowhere near me, apparently. Don't blame me, blame Oppo for that. But cropping in, and it's very obvious that the 8K, at least with the 3x camera, it doesn't help the Xiaomi whatsoever. That doesn't surprise me all that much, especially with the 8K performance that we have seen thus far. It's atrocious, to say the least, on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, and this is exactly what I expected, you know? Basically, no proper details. But then what about that 4.3x telephoto on the Xiaomi? This one has 8K and it is supposedly a really nice sensor. So this is basically 100mm or 4.3x crops on both. It's partially digital on the Vivo because we only have 3.7x on that, and it's also just 4K as opposed to 8K on the Xiaomi. Cropping all the way in, and without question, once again, the Xiaomi is the one with less detail. I would say that there's definitely a little bit of sharpening happening on the Vivo, but honestly the amount of detail that you're getting, the amount of textures that are just popping out, it's very significant, and there's no two ways about it. There's no excuse for the Xiaomi to be performing as badly as it does right now. And then of course for our home stretch we have got nighttime video. Now, upon first glance you'll notice that yes, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra definitely goes for a darker approach, which may not be the worst thing in the world, but walking around it does feel kind of obvious that both phones are kind of suffering from stabilization. To be completely honest, I expected the Xiaomi to perform a little bit better because it has a dedicated night mode video. I would expect that the night mode video to just have slightly better, more optimized stabilization. But of course, for the sake of this comparison, I would say that both phones are almost performing exactly the same. They have similar levels of overall quality, and the noise and green levels are very similar, low on both, which is good. And the stabilization is also almost exactly the same. And now lastly, we have got slow motion, which is 4K 120 on both. Honestly, at this point, I think it's very obvious that 4K 120 is just significantly better than 1080p 240. I don't think there's anything that anyone can tell that can change my mind, not by a long shot, because 120 is plenty slow. You can get a lot of good stuff, and the 4K detail preservation and just the look of the video that you can have, which is very obvious right here. You can't really get that with 1080p 240. It's just not nearly as good. It is more dramatic, more slow, but it's not gonna have even like a quarter or even a fifth of the quality that we're getting right here, right now. And with that said, we are at the end of our video comparison. So here's the deal. I got into this comparison completely expecting to see some major problems with stabilization on the Vivo. But guess what we saw? Huge issues when it comes to stabilization, just through and through with the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. I would say that the Vivo performed admirably, it just flew under the radar with all the problems that we're seeing on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. This one was fine. The Vivo was completely fine. There were no problems almost. And that is what is just mind-blowing. There are certain things that makes zero sense on the Vivo, which is to say 8K. The fact that main camera 8K is not present with the same exact sensor, and somehow ultra-wide 8K is the route that Vivo chose. It makes no sense. I think it could have been a really good argument for using 8K on the Vivo had we actually had proper 8K implementation across the board, but that's not really the case. I would recommend, by all means, using ultra-wide 8K. I think it's a fantastic feature to have, and it actually properly works, as opposed to whatever the hell it is that Xiaomi is doing with 8K. That does not work, no by a long shot. As nice as it might be to have the options, it's not usable. That's the best way to put it. So with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed, found this helpful, because yeah, I do think that if Vivo adds a few features, they could be at the top of the game, and Xiaomi has a lot of work to do. That's the best conclusion right here, right now. So with that said, hope you guys enjoyed, found this helpful, and I'll see you guys sooner with more. Cheers.